Namaskar. Someone asked me a recurring question. This is a frequently asked question, but in the last few weeks, so many people asked me the same question, and I thought maybe it's worth making a short video note. So here I am. The question is regarding Bhishma Nirvana, and partly this could be because of some people now taking deep interest in watching videos but also reading the books. And so one individual asked me this question after he completed reading Bhishma Nirvana. And so he understood the entire Bhishma Nirvana. And when he was trying to explain this to others, I think that's where uh, this particular query came in. Maybe this individual was not successful in explaining the importance of the Bhishma Nirvana evidence. So he contacted me asking me some questions, and I wondered why so much confusion. So I thought I'll just create a video in response to this. So let me just jump into the presentation itself. I'm not going to state the question, but I will rephrase the question instead of the way he wrote the question. In a broader sense, the question was what exactly the Bhishma Nirvana evidence is telling us. I'll start with the answer, then I'll go through some explanatory evidence, some details, and I'll conclude with this summary again. So if somebody asks you what exactly Bhishma Nirvana evidence, every single piece of this from the Mahabharata text is telling us, well, it's giving us information in a historical narration form about the events of Mahabharata. But specifically, when I wrote the book Bhishma Nirvana, it was focused on using that evidence and to demonstrate how that evidence also points to 5561 BCE, or a shorter interval within which 5561 BCE falls. So to explain this in a simple language, one may say that the Bhishma Nirvana evidence decisively proves that Mahabharata War happened only around 7560 years ago. We'll see how we arrived at this number. And in the parenthesis, if you notice, I have typed 3.5 times 2160, and of course that equals to 7560 years. So we will look at where do we get this 3.5, and also what is the significance of 2160. Now this is how we come to this number. For example, the Mahabharata evidence is crystal clear that Bhishma was on the bed of arrows for greater than 95 days. Now once we understand this, this also tells us, this is a simple arithmetic, guys, based on the internal evidence of Mahabharata. Now Bhishma fell down in the battle on the 10th day of the war, and that means if Bhishma is lying on the bed of arrows for a minimum of 95 days, what it tells us is that the first day of the Mahabharata war was at least 105 days before the day of winter solstice. Okay, and therefore I'm writing there, thus during the first month of Sharad season. How do we arrive at that conclusion? Well, again, simple. There are 6 seasons in 12 months, so 2 months comprise about 1 season. The day of winter solstice is the end of Hemanta Rutu. So from that day, winter solstice, we go backwards 2 months of Hemanta season. So that would be what? About 60 days, 30 times 2. And then let's say we go back further, the second month of Sharad season, that's another 30 days, we got 90 days. And now if we go additional 15 days, that would be the middle of the first month of Sharad season. Okay, at least that's what is required. And so that's how we are saying that the timing of Mahabharat war was during the first month of Sharad season. It has to be, it must be. There are no ifs, buts, anything like this. Okay, and then that also means Bhishma was lying on the bed of arrows through the most of Sharad season, like close to say at least a month or month and 15 days or so approximately, plus the entire 2 month long Hemant season. Okay, that's how we can account for the 95 days. Now, if you look at today's situation, the month of Margashirsha, when we celebrate Gita Jayanti, it occurs in the December in our time, okay, which is what? Very close to the day of winter solstice. Now, Mahabharata text also tells us, the internal evidence tells us that the war itself took place in the month of Margashirsha. Now, combine these three or four bullets. So, the month of Margashirsha must occur during the first part of Sharad season, and that's what I'm writing there. The month of Margashirsha was during the first month of Sharad season at the time of Mahabharata war. Today it is during the second month of Hemant season. When the Hemant season ends, that's where Margashirsha month is. This means a shift of about 3 to 4 months has taken place. Shift of what? Shift of month with respect to what? Shift of lunar month, in this case a Margashirsha, and therefore this will happen to all other months with respect to the other Rutus. But the month of Margashirsha, which was at the beginning of Sharad season during the Mahabharata war, today it is at the end of Hemanta season, and that's how we have a shift of 3 to 4 months. Now, this is where people sometimes confuse. Now they start thinking, how can this happen? Well, guys, it happens. Now, either if you don't know, then you have to study astronomy, or you take it on a shraddha that nobody is trying to trick you here. That is a very fundamental basic astronomy phenomenon. We can call this astronomy 101. Okay, and that's where that number 2160 years comes into picture. We can say, or based on our astronomy knowledge, we can say that a shift of one lunar month with respect to a season occurs every 2160 years. So it's a very, very slow phenomenon. Now, since there is a shift of about 3 to 4 months, we are taking that number, multiplying by 2160. So if you multiply 3, we get the number 6480 years ago. If we multiply by 4, we get the number 8640 years ago. And if we take the exactly halfway, which is that 105 days, okay, therefore I pick the number 3.5 times 2160 equal to 7560 years ago. So let's look at some of the facts. What is the Mahabharata text telling us? For example, there is this confused understanding of the majority of Mahabharata dating researchers that began about 400 years ago with a mistake, or rather a series of mistakes by one Nilakantha Chaturdhar. And we'll look at that in a minute. But I also want to show you how a certain evidence, when it is tested empirically in a scientific fashion, and we draw a logical inference, how that knowledge, once it is tested, retested, repeatability, it passes all the good tests, it becomes a part of background knowledge. For example, the famous Arundhati Vasishtha observation, this is part of the Mahabharata text. When it was tested in objective fashion, it produced a unique time interval, okay, for the timing of Mahabharata. Now, why did it happen? Well, the background Karya Karana Bhav is basically the astronomy, okay, the precession of the Earth's axis, the proper motions of the stars such as Arundhati, Vasishtha, and so on. So when we did that, what was the conclusion? The conclusion was that this particular observation of Arundhati and Vasishtha, as given at the time of Mahabharata war, given in the Mahabharata text, is only valid, only possible, only empirically real during this predicted interval, sometime after 10,248 or sometime before 4636 BCE. Why? Because only during this time interval, anyone watching the sky from the earth would see Arundhati walk ahead of Vasishtha. Now, once we do this, this becomes a part of our background knowledge. Okay, so based on that, we finally figured out why 5561 BCE is the year of Mahabharata War. But before even I reach there, or anyone studying the dating research of Mahabharata should ask, but could this be just a coincidence? Like, it's only one observation out of 300 plus different astronomy descriptions that occur in the Mahabharata text. And that is where the importance of Bhishma Nirvana evidence comes into picture. This is very simple evidence to understand, not necessarily its astronomy implications, but in terms of what exactly the evidence is. Well, the evidence says Bhishma was on the bed of arrows for more than 95 days. And how do we calculate that? We calculate this by just simply following the Mahabharata evidence. Bhishma fell in the battle on the 10th day of the war. Then the war continued for the next 9 days. So he was on the bed of arrows 10th, 11, 12, 13. If you just count, you will know these are 9 days. Then Mahabharata tells us that there were few events that occurred. We will simply ignore that, okay, because we don't need that number to add up to 95. But they might have taken a day or so. Then Mahabharata tells us that all of them went to the bank of Ganga. This is this reference Shanti Parva, or the first number. And if you notice what it says Masam Ekam Bahipura. Then they stayed on the bank of Ganga for 1 month. In an extremely conservative fashion, I have taken this time as 27 days. But you can relate that it could be 30 days. So if you take 27, it adds up to 92. If you take 30, it adds up to 95. And in reality, there are additional days that we have not counted. So I feel very comfortable with 95. So we'll just go with 95. Because remember that number X days it says. So after spending a month on the bank of Ganga, they came back to Hastinapur. Yudhishthir was crowned as a king. And at that time, Krishna tells Yudhishthir that, hey, they have to go and visit somebody, that somebody is Bhishma. So they immediately leave from Hastinapur, go towards Kurukshetra, where Bhishma is lying on the bed of arrows, okay, protected by the soldiers and so on. And on this day, Krishna tells Bhishma that Bhishma had additional 56 days to live. That is that Pachashatam Shachakuru Pravira Shesham Dinanam Tava Jivitasya. This is that reference, second reference, Shanti Parva 51.14. And then we have a wonderful descriptions of every day Yudhishthir going to Bhishma in the daytime, spending a whole day with Bhishma, when Bhishma is guiding him on many different aspects of Rajadharma, Moksha Dharma, Apad Dharma, and so on. And this continues for 6 days. On the 6th day, Bhishma recites Vishnu Sahasranam and then says to Yudhishthir that now he should go back to Hastinapur and not come back the way he has came back to Bhishma the last 6 days, but stay there in Hastinapur until the day of winter solstice. Yudhishthir agrees, leaves for the Hastinapur, and if you look at this big last reference here, Anushasan Parva, from chapter 153, the description says, then Yudhishthir went back to Hastinapur and stayed there for 50 nights until the day of winter solstice, when he returned to Bhishma, and of course that was the day of Bhishma Nirvana. So the mathematics is very clear. Now against this, there's a tons of evidence. If you notice just below this, you can see multiple references from Stri Parva and then Anushasan Parva and Shanti Parva. Close to 100 references, by the way, pointing to these 95 days. Against this, the question we have to ask is, where does this false narrative of Bhishma lying on the bed of arrows for 58 days was floated, and why it has sustained for 400 plus years? But even right now, there is a group of Mahabharata dating researchers who are still in their tamasic slumber that they refuse to come out of, and we'll see why that is so. Okay, but just keep in mind for now that the comprehensive Mahabharata evidence says more than 95 days. Okay, now I briefly explained the astronomy background behind it, but just to show you how this logic of scientific method, the triangulation, but also triangulation of explanation, prediction, testing in the context of theory and in the context of background knowledge, how that helps us. Suppose just for a minute we take this so-called, okay, so I say so-called because it is false, but it has become a what you say, something to be just assumed. And why did people come to this conclusion? Because somebody did it 400 years ago, and we'll briefly discuss that. But afterwards, whoever accepted this claim of Bhishma lying on the bed of arrows for 58 days never bothered to actually study Mahabharata text. Recently, I had a wonderful debate with Vedvir Aryaji. And during the debate, if you watch this on HyperQuest, Vedvir Aryaji referred to this. That he said, all Mahabharata researchers, including himself, basically were stuck into assuming that Bhishma was on bed of arrows for 58 days until I said that's not making sense. Let me go back to Mahabharata text, and I actually found out that this is not the case. The real answer is more than 95 days. Anyways, so suppose we take this as a prediction and try to test it. How do we test it? Well, okay, let's see if this is a prediction 58 days. Do we find evidence for this in support of this? Well, we can look at all the Bhishma Nirvana descriptions, and if we do that, which is what I did back in 2009, and I found this 58 is not correct. Rather, the answer is Bhishma was on the bed of arrows, Sharashaya, for more than 95 days, which I already shared with you. So I'm just saying how we can actually check it. So what does that mean? Remember the quadratic schema? We have a problem 1. To solve this, we propose a tentative solution, tentative theory, TT. And using that, we have a predictions. We check that against the evidence to see if we can eliminate the error. In this case, there is no elimination of error because the claim was 58, the actual evidence is showing 95, and therefore it doesn't make sense. Okay, so what does it say? We have some software to get rid of there. Okay, all right. So 95 days. Now, many people simply wouldn't know other than looking at reading the Mahabharata text in detail, and therefore I wrote this book Bhishma Nirvana, so that in a very what you can say crisp fashion you can look at the evidence. But I also want to tell you, and in fact it surprised me, and so therefore I want to bring it to your attention, that this evidence was actually not hiding somewhere, that people just simply missed it. That evidence is there everywhere. For example, there are 100 plus chronology and astronomy descriptions in the Mahabharata text itself. But lo and behold, guys, even a text like Amar Chitrakatha, where the idea is that they are telling the stories meant for children, so many of the key details or the details that are not otherwise important to tell a simple story are basically not taken into account. Or some great authors like G.N. Dandekar, lovingly called Gonida in Marathi, when he is writing a narrative story of Mahabharata, again not with a focus on dating or anything or chronology aspect, even somebody like him, where the focus is not on chronology, he has very easily mentioned all this evidence, and so is Amar Chitrakatha. So I wanted to just show you a couple of demonstration of that. So for example, everyone is aware that the war lasted for 18 days, so that everyone knows. Now, after that, this is from Amar Chitrakatha, they went to the bank of Ganga, they did the Jalakriya for all the dates, just like they did the Agni Kriya before. Then they went to Ganga, they did the Jalakriya. And once that is done, for example, if you want to read this, okay, so then they went from the city for a month. This is what it says. After the funeral rites were over, the Pandavas decided to stay away from the city for a month. I don't know if you can read it, but that's here in the top right hand corner of that picture. So that's what they did. And where is this Amar Chitrakatha getting this information from? Of course, from the Mahabharata text. Okay, that is Shanti Parva, the very first adhyay, and then the very first two shloka. Tatra te su mahatmano nyava san kurunandana shaucham nivarta yishanto masam ekam bahipurat. Okay, and so this is that reference to those 27 to 30 days. And now fast forward, after that they came back to Hastinapur. Then Krishna reminds Yudhishthir, so they go to Bhishma at Kurukshetra, and this is the day. Now see, this is an extremely minor issue as far as the Amar Chitrakatha goes, but even, and I was pleasantly shocked and surprised to see that even there they have referred to this nitty-gritty detail. And so here Krishna is telling Bhishma that now only 56 days remain before your soul ascends to heaven. So additional 56 days from that day. So already a month has gone by, 30 plus days have gone by, plus the 9 days of the war itself. Okay, so 39, 40 days, plus 56. Okay, guys, that directly gives you 95. Okay, so just I wanted to show that as a demonstration. But many other great authors, writers knew it. For example, Gonida wrote in Marathi. The book itself is called Mahabharata, and here he is referring Uttar Kriya संपल्यावर दोष परिहारार्थ पांडव नगराबाहेरच एक मास वास्तव्य करून राहिले. That 1 month reference again. Or afterwards in his narration he is saying once Yudhishthir met Bhishma, this discussion between them, Jnana Satra, lasted for 56 days. 56 दिवस ज्ञान सत्र सुरू होते. Now there I want to give one correction that although Gonida wrote 56 days, in reality it was not for 56 days. Mahabharata evidence is very clear. It lasted for 6 days, and from the 6th day onwards, Bhishma was lying alone for the next 50 nights, and he asked Yudhishthir to return to Hastinapur and stay in Hastinapur until the day of winter solstice. And Mahabharata tells us that that's exactly what Yudhishthir did. Yudhishthir stayed, went back to Hastinapur, stayed there for 50 nights, and then he came back to Bhishma for on the day of Bhishma Nirvana. So I'm just telling you that it's there. This book is easily 60 plus years old by Gonida, and I don't know when the Amar Chitrakatha story was written. But that's also easily 20, 30, 40 years old, and the information was there. So you have to start asking, really wondering, these Mahabharata dating researchers who are very boldly claiming something that can be falsified rather easily, it just tells us that they never bothered to read the Mahabharata text. But the problem gets worse because, okay, maybe they didn't, they just trusted the work of previous researchers, which is not a bad starting point. But when the evidence doesn't agree with the predictions, or predictions do not agree with the evidence, you have to stop and say, what's wrong? Which one needs to be changed? And they did not do it. But even worse is that, maybe the worst, is that even after these guys have made aware of this, they are still sticking to it, and now you have to ask the question, so what's their agenda? Okay, so we have to summarize the effect of this Bhishma lying on the bed of arrows for 95 days. Okay, how can we visually show that? Well, let's begin with our background knowledge of Arundhati Vasishta. It's completely independent evidence, and it tells us, or it told us, that the Mahabharata war can happen only between these two dates, sometime after 10,000 BC and sometime before 4600 BC, not after that or not before 10,000 BC. Against this background, now let's look at the completely independent evidence, independent to Arundhati Vasishta, but part of the same Mahabharata text. Now, what is it telling us? If you look at the Bhishma Nirvana evidence in a very crude fashion, that simple calculation of 95 days, it gives you a time bracket of 7000 BC through 4700 BC. This is the only time interval within which a Mahabharata war can happen. Okay, now if you fine tune this with additional evidence of Mahabharata text, you can consider this as a sensitivity analysis or refinement analysis. Okay, these are two different things, but You can use them interchangeably in this case if you like. In any case, if you add some additional constraints on the first day of the Mahabharata war, like we looked at it, it has to be at least 105 days separated from the day of winter solstice, that is before winter solstice, and that it has to be the month of Margashirsha, and so on. There is some additional information that we know from the Mahabharata text, that it has to be the Shukla Paksha of Margashirsha, because the war began. There is sufficient evidence to show us that war began at the end of Kartika Amavasya, and then Margashirsha, Shukla, Pratipada, and so on. So if we take all of this, it allows us to refine that time frame or test the robustness of that time frame, and you can call this a sensitivity analysis. Now I just mentioned this because many people don't even understand what sensitivity analysis means. Okay, anyways, what it is giving us is actually a very narrow in comparison to Arundhati Vasishta or otherwise, time interval of about 1600 years, 1500 to 1600 years. Between that 6722 BCE and 5125 BCE. And then of course I use additional planetary evidence from the Mahabharata text and additional other chronology astronomy evidence to arrive at 5561 BCE and specific days of 16 October through 2nd November as the 18-day time interval for the Mahabharata war. Okay, it's extremely robust and based on crucial evidence internal to Mahabharata text. We do not have to go anywhere outside the Mahabharata text to arrive at the specific time period or specific days or specific year of the Mahabharata war. This is how powerful the evidence is. Just to show you visually, so we looked at all the Bhishma Nirvana evidence. The testing tells us that he was there for more than 95 days. We apply the additional constraints such as the month of Margashirsha, the connection with the day of winter solstice, separation of the day of winter solstice from the first day of Mahabharata war, use the astronomy knowledge to it, and it gives us this time interval, 6722 BC through 5125 BCE. And the year of Mahabharata war must be somewhere in between. It cannot be anywhere else. No ifs, no buts. Okay. So why no one realized this until now? This specific 95 days. Well, that Bhishma Nirvana evidence produces this same lower limit, actually same as Arundhati Vasishta. So this is not a coincidence, guys. Okay, the way Bhagwan Vyasadeva has very ingeniously, meticulously has collected this evidence and embedded into the narration of Mahabharata is beyond amazing. It's marvelous. Okay, now the reason possibly the people did not realize this, and even the first time this blunder of 58 days was created, was due to one Nilakanta Chaturdhar, amazing guy. From the time of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, he was a Maharashtrian Brahmin who lived on the bank of Ganga in Varanasi and did a great job of collecting all the manuscripts of Mahabharata at that time and created a comprehensive edition of Mahabharata. Okay, just a great job. Now, I'll make another video on exactly the blunders that he did, how he played with the data to because once he made up his mind that there were 58 days for Bhishma on the bed of arrows, how he tried to wrongly bend other evidence to see to fit this his 58-day narration, and how still it becomes a disaster. I'll make a separate video on that. But cherry-picking fallacy of Bhishma's duration on the bed of arrows for 58 days is due to a mistake of this Nilakanta Chaturdhar about 350 years ago. Unfortunately, so hey, to err is human, so that's not the surprise or a worry. Unfortunately, lazy and careless Mahabharata researchers are continuing this mistake with gusto. This is the reason why their dates cannot corroborate internal Mahabharata evidence. If anyone has a date that falls any time after 5100, just simplicity, let's say 5000 BC, it's not going to match with the internal Mahabharata evidence. It won't corroborate Arundhati Vasishtha observation. It won't corroborate Bhishma Nirvana evidence, and guess what? It will not corroborate 50 plus planetary evidence. Okay, different planets, visible planets, non-visible planets such as Rahu, Ketu, and their positions, different positions relative to nakshatras, about 50 plus different evidence. They will not able to match. In fact, they will not able to match even within this 1500 years interval. They will only able to match for the year 5561 BCE. Otherwise, it does not match. Anyways, so 100%, 100 plus Mahabharata researchers still believe this myth of 58 days. So I want you to understand, anyone saying 58 days, understand the person has not done his or her homework. Okay. Now, very sad. This is, in science, this should not happen. But then realize that most of these folks don't understand what scientific acumen is, what science means, what logic means, and how you bring these things together. So they want people to believe it too, this nonsense of 58 days. And why? I'm just guessing here. Otherwise, their incompetence, because they are defending this day and night. Some of them are doing it for 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. Some of them are doing it for 10 years. Doesn't matter the time interval, but they are defending this even when they were made aware of this 95. So it will show their incompetence and ignorance. So they're saying, you know what, I will rather ride this nonsense of 58 days, and maybe no one will find out, or at least they will have some supporters, who just in a Shraddha Buddhi, you can say, or in the authority fallacy would continue to listen to them, maybe just by their titles or whatever the reason they are famous for. So the unfortunate reality is they are willing to compromise the truth rather than admit their mistakes and clear the path for establishing the correct timeline, historical timelines for Indian civilization, Hindu civilization. And why does this happen? Like, remember I said, they don't want people to become familiar with their incompetence, ignorance, and foolishness. And why does that happen? Like, you say, okay, but guys, a number of you might be thinking, hey, if I made a mistake, if you made a mistake, you will admit to it. Well, tat trairashyam raga dvesha moha arthantara bhavat. Arthantara, there is actual true meaning, which is to say Bhishma was on the bed of arrows for 95 days, and therefore the timing of Mahabharata has to be 5000 BCE or before. Now, against that, Arthantara, where does the gap in the understanding comes from? And Nyaya Darshana says it comes from three different reasons. Tat trairasham, raga, dvesha, moha. Or moha, it calls it mudha also. Which is to say, is because of emotion. Somebody has committed to something, somebody doesn't have the intellectual maturity, that to err is human. In fact, Professor Wheeler, at Princeton used to say, in science, our goal is to make mistakes as fast as we can, because through mistakes we make progress. But these folks don't understand that. They cannot bear, just admitting that they have made a mistake. So they stick to their emotion. Rather, they would hide rather than admit. So the next one is a dvesha. Because some people feel that fear of missing out, FOMO kind of thing. Like, how come they were not successful in figuring it out the right timing, namely 5561 BCE? So they become envious of the date itself, the 5561 BC, envious of the researchers behind them, such as myself, Nilesh Oak, or likes of Dr. P.V. Vartak, who proposed 5561 BC like more than 40 plus 45, 50 years ago. Now, when I mention Dr. P.V. Vartak's name, many of you would not have even heard it until now. And why is that? Such a great researcher. Against this, we have many pseudo researchers, and their name gets stated, and I have no problem with that. If the popularity is what they wanted, hey, be my guest. But satyena labhyas tapasa yesha atma. If you want to get to ultimately knowing who we are, we have to follow the truth. Or satyameva jayate. Eventually, it's going to come. Truth can wait. It is used to it, but it will come. So some people who think, maybe they don't want to admit their incompetence or ignorance or their stupidity, they are very, what you call, immature, okay, myopic in their vision, in not admitting it. And the last one, so dvesha, enviousness, this is very funny. Why would somebody be envious in subjects such as finding the true date of Mahabharata? But the last one is a moha. And Nyayadarshan says is beautiful on this, moha or a muda, which means lack of intellect, lack of comprehension ability, stupidity, and so on. And then, after mentioning these three, actually there's another sutra that where actually Nyayadarshan goes on saying, hey, look, I said there are these three reasons why people, deviate from the truth, but then says actually there is only one. And what is that? The moha or mudata, that is stupidity or lack of intellect. Because when that happens, to hide that stupidity, the person becomes emotional, or the person become envious of someone where they have found the correct answer. Anyways, let's move on. But then how to explain the reference of 58 days? Well, these people don't know. They just borrowed blindly from wherever they found it. But why did Nilakanta Chaturdhar in the first place came across this? The reason is there is indeed one reference. This Bhishma says on the day of Bhishma Nirvana, when Yudhishthir and a party, Bhagwan, Krishna, Vyasadeva, everyone comes to Kurukshetra, when Bhishma is talking to Yudhishthir, he refers to this and he says, Ashta Panchashatam Ratrya Shayanasyaadya Megataha Shareshu Nishitagreshu Yatha Varasha Shatam Tatha. The past 58 days, 58 or rather 58 nights, doesn't matter, the same thing. The past 58 nights that I spent on this bed of arrows, it felt like hundreds of years. It was very painful. Okay, that's what Bhishma is telling Yudhishthira. So there is a verse like that where he is referring to 58 nights, the past 58 nights, Gata. Now, what past 58 nights is referring to? Now, keep in mind, he is on the bed of arrows for more than 95 days. Okay, actually, the number comes out to be 98 days. So that's more than 95. Okay. But the Mahabharata text evidence says more than 95. It doesn't say 98. So, from the 10th day of the Mahabharata War all the way to the day of winter solstice, he's there for 95 days. But why is he referring to the past 58? Because remember, that's why I'm showing you the arrows here. After the Mahabharata War, and after they had spent 1 month on the bank of Ganga, and after Yudhishthir was coronated as a king, and when finally they came back to Kurukshetra to meet Bhishma, this is the day Krishna told Bhishma that Bhishma had additional 56 days to live. How did Krishna must have estimated this number? Well, with the day of winter solstice is in mind, because that's what Bhishma is basically sticking to. He wants to wait until the sun turns northward, which is the day of winter solstice, so maybe plus 1 day. Now this is very interesting calculation, because let's ignore the day when Krishna is telling this to Bhishma. He says you have additional 56 days, so don't count that day. And Krishna is referring to that 56, referring to the day of winter solstice, and the day after is a Bhishma Nirvana. So now we have the day when Krishna said this, that 1 plus 56 plus 1 day when actually the Bhishma Nirvana occurred. That adds up to 58. And we can very clearly say, now understand that Bhishma is referring to those past 58 days. That is to say, from the time they had met Bhishma after Yudhishthir was coronated. Then, of course, you remember they spent back and forth 6 days, and then they left for Hastinapur, came back after 50 days. And this is 58 days what Bhishma is referring to. So, this all fits beautifully, can be explained beautifully. But somebody who did not bother to read those additional references such as Shanti Parva 1.1 and 2, Shanti Parva 51.14 or Anushasan Parva chapter 153.5.6 and only focused on this, okay, guess what? They just wrongly thought that Bhishma was on the bed of arrows only for 58 days. Alright, so now Nilakanta Chaturdhar's mistake, about 400 years ago. Okay, he did think that Bhishma only was on the bed of arrows for 15 days. And in that light, he tried to twist all of this evidence on the screen that you are seeing. I'm showing you only three set of shlokas, but if you just see below, Stri Parva, there are multiple references, Anushasan Parva, there are multiple references, and Shanti Parva, there are multiple references. Just a last one before we close. Now look at the point of winter solstice. Okay, so the point of winter solstice is here. That is where the position of sun would be on the day of winter solstice, and exactly opposite. So if you go here, like so that is the summer solstice, whatever the nakshatra is, and the full moon would be near those nakshatra, and therefore the name of a lunar month would be based on that. So today in our times, 21st century, when winter solstice sun is here, the corresponding lunar month would be what? Would be about Margashirsha, Pausha, because the full moon would be near Margashirsha or near Pusha, somewhere in this region. So either it will be month of Margashirsha or Pausha. Now go backward by about that 7,500 years, okay, that 3.5 month shift. And what do you see now? Again, the winter solstice point would be here, okay, the day of winter solstice would be here. And now if we go back, notice what is happening. Where does the month of Margashirsha occurs? So full moon would be near nakshatra Mrugashirsha, and the sun's position would be exactly opposite to that. And where would it be? It will be at the beginning of the Sharad season, and that's exactly what Mahabharata text is describing. Okay, so in fact from winter solstice we have to go back about 3.5 months, so 2 months of Hemanta plus this 1 month of Sharad plus at least 15 days. So when the Mahabharata War began, the sun was somewhere here, and it was the season of Sharad, and the corresponding month would be what? The exactly opposite would be the position of a full moon. So it was somewhere near Mrugashirsha, Ardra, Rohini. So that was the Margashirsha, month of Margashirsha. Okay, so quick summary. I'm just repeating what we just did before. Bhishma Nirvana evidence decisively proves that Mahabharata War happened only around 7,560 years ago, using this shift of 3.5 lunar months with respect to season, and 1 month takes 2,160 years. Okay, Mahabharata evidence is clear. It was more than 95 days. We saw the connection of month of Margashirsha and how the shift of 3+ month has happened. And basically, guys, that is it. Okay, please write your comments. Let me know what you think. And next time I'll talk about how Nilakanta Chaturdhar made the mistake, and how he tried to justify it with all kinds of funny interpretations. Okay, so the issue was not the knowledge of Sanskrit. He knew Sanskrit, and he used it in the best advantageous way. At least tried his best in a manipulative fashion to adjust other evidence to see if it fits. Now, is it that manipulation? I'm using the word in a bad way? Not necessarily. Because once you make up your mind that something may be the truth, that you may try to see if other evidence also corroborates, fits. And these are the texts which are very old, from now we know that it's from 7,500 years ago. So some of the Pathaved entered the picture, and therefore we are not always clear, whether what we are seeing, is it due to our interpretation, or is it due to some of the changes that have been made. And so, but we will look at, it's a very interesting study, especially those who are interested in a deep research. And I don't mean just limited to Mahabharata, research related to any discipline of science. This is a wonderful exercise to see, and especially for Indic research, Indic history research and whatnot, what kind of twisting of interpretation can happen. And we can learn from the experiences of the one who came before us, on whose shoulders we are standing, and therefore hopefully we can see further and better. Okay, namaskar. Please write your comments. Let me know what you think of this episode. Mahadev.